You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Hilliard MacBeth, CEO of the MacBeth Group in Edmonton and author of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. Welcome to the show, Hilliard.
Nice to be on your show again, Jim.
Well, when the bubble bursts, you're seeing that happen in the Alberta real estate market, aren't you?
I am, and it's amazing because I was watching BNN a couple of days ago, and they had a guest on who was the head of Royal LePage Real Estate, and he was giving a very rosy, positive scenario. So I couldn't believe what I was seeing and hearing, so I went and checked, and just for fun, I looked up the number of apartments for sale in the Edmonton area between $100,000 and $300,000, and I came up with 1,037 listings. It's just a mind-boggling number, and these, unfortunately, are not great properties. They often are converted apartment buildings, walk-up apartment buildings. We had many, many, many of those for decades in Edmonton, and then when the boom was on, they got converted to condos and people bought them, and now they're trying to sell them, but they can't sell them.
Is there any hope for those people? Could they lower their price and take advantage of what you are saying are now much lower house prices?
Well, the thing is that they apparently, I talked to a realtor on Tuesday, and he said that he had properties that had sold at $200,000 about 7 years ago that he now is trying to get $135,000 for, and he can't get them. And he's talking about possibly lowering it to $115,000 or $120,000 to see if it would sell. But he said there's just so little buying interest that he doesn't know if it's going to make any difference. And the problem for the higher end houses, because there is activity in the $400,000 single family home market, which has now become a possibility. For a while you could hardly get a single-family home for $400,000, but now you can. The problem is a lot of those buyers would come from this apartment ownership, condo ownership area, and if they can't sell their condo, then they can't move up. And that's where the whole thing is. You'll see people tell you that, the single-family home market is completely separate from the condo market, and it doesn't matter. You'll hear that in Toronto, you hear it in Vancouver, but it's just not true. The reality is the two are very connected, because an $800,000 home has to be a move up from a $400,000, and a $400,000 has to be move up from a $200,000. So if the $200,000 can't sell, it can't move up to $400,000, and so on up the line.
Is there a point where their price for selling just wouldn't pay off the mortgage, so they're literally stuck in that place?
They're stuck. And now the one thing is, if they could manage to scrape together a down payment, because I predict that very soon builders of new homes around Calgary and Edmonton will be offering incredible incentives, because they don't like to lower. If the new home price is $400,000 and they've had phase 1 and phase 2, they won't want to lower it below $400,000 for phase 3. But what they might do is to throw in a new car, hopefully not a Volkswagen diesel, but some new car, and so technically you're getting the place for, say, $375,000 because you're getting a car thrown in. But so those people are going to miss some wonderful opportunities. So what they might, if they can come up with the down payment somehow, what they could do is rent out these condos that they can't sell for $150,000. But unfortunately, there's so many of them that rent is going to push rents lower. So the gap between renting and owning, which is in Canada is already the highest gap in the world, the price of buying is much, much higher, and the price of renting is much, much lower than other countries in the world like the United States. It's going to get even wider. So people may just decide just to stay where they are. But if they can rent it out, they might be able to move up and take advantage of it. But then that means they own two places, and the banks, we haven't talked yet about what's going to happen with the banks. The banks are going to start to get very nervous because they're already seeing foreclosures coming in.
Well, the IMF said Canadian real estate was overvalued by 30 to 40%, using that rent to mortgage ratio that I was told was unrealistic for Canada. But in the Edmonton area, at least, it is realistic, and that 30-40% gap is real.
Yeah, people would much rather own, especially in Alberta where the population is younger, and if they can swing it, they look at their mortgage payments. They don't look at the full cost of ownership. They just look at the mortgage, usually includes taxes and that, and if it's $1,500 and rent is $1,500, then they'd rather own than rent. But at some point it gets so ridiculous, or at some point that mortgage money just isn't available. I've talked to, in the last 2 weeks, I've talked to two different lawyers working for big law firms, and both of them said that they have gotten record numbers of foreclosure files from banks. One said in 1 week, 15 new files were dumped on her desk. And she said in their law firm, they've never had 15 new foreclosure files as far back as anybody can remember in 1 week before. And this hasn't even hit the papers yet. I mean, there's no mention, but the banks will be aware of it, and the banks will start changing their attitude towards how much loans they want to put out in. I mean, up until recently, the banks were trying as hard as they can to put as much money out as they possibly can in Calgary and Edmonton because it was viewed as the safest place to lend money. But that's changing now. And if the banks start shrinking they start turning off the tap of money, or if they start slowing it down a little bit, then all the bets are off. Things change completely.
As you said, it hasn't hit the papers. Is there a chance that the papers maybe aren't publishing this because one of their biggest sources of revenue are the ads promoting house sales?
Well, it's an interesting question because I wonder, I really do wonder when you read some of the columns. There's a personal finance column for one of the national newspapers that I have talked to several times, and he said, you should buy now because you may never be able to get into home ownership because prices keep rising. And I was kind of shocked because he has written different columns before about with a different slant, more along the lines of maybe renting is a better option. So you wonder if there's pressure on people that work for the newspapers to put a more positive glow on it. But certainly, I think most people would prefer not to have to face up to the reality that the value of their property is not going up anymore and perhaps might even be going down. So it's not a popular view to sort of say to people, well, guess what? Your home is going to be worth 25% less than it is. But the banks will know it. And then, of course, the banks, they have so much pressure on them in the bank branches to meet their targets. They all have quotas for the number of mortgages and the number of HELOCs that they put out. And it's going to be very difficult in Alberta for, as they get close to the year end. And the way the bank works, as I understand it from what I've known and seen over the years, is the targets are set in such a way that you're expected to make your target. So in other words, it's not what they call a stretch target. It's a if you don't make this target, we're going to sort of wonder if you're not doing your job kind of target. Right? And so, but a big portion of their compensation might be, if they make $60,000 a year, maybe there's another $10 or $15 or even $20,000 if they make their bonus. So they can't afford not to make their bonus. So this will be a very interesting time in the last 3 or 4 months of the year and into January in Alberta because all kinds of people are involved in this.
And for the rest of Canada, of course, you're talking about a national writer. He's writing for the Toronto audience, maybe Vancouver as well. But outside of Vancouver and Toronto, where you have tremendous pressure for land space and so on, the rest of Canada is pretty spread out. It's not like you have a shortage of space in Edmonton or Calgary.
I was in a northern Alberta town yesterday visiting a client, and it's been a boom town for the last 10 years, and there's for sale signs up and down every single street, and my client told me that there's lots and lots of rooms for rent and apartments for rent and even homes for rent. They were all being rented out to oil and gas workers, and now those oil and gas workers have all gone back to Ontario or Newfoundland or New Brunswick or wherever they're from, and there's also several new motels that were built. It's hard to imagine, but people were building motels just to rent out to crews. And so now the hotel rooms are empty. I mean, you could probably go to a motel, and if you could stand living in a motel, I don't know if you could, but you could probably get a great deal on any one of these motel rooms. So there's going to be a lot of options. And then, of course, in outside of the Toronto, Vancouver areas, there's just no shortage of land. It's a myth in Canada that we somehow have some kind of shortage of land. There's no shortage of land. Even in downtown Toronto, I would argue that there's no real shortage of land because they were talking about, for instance, moving the big freeway there down by the lake. Well, that would free up so much land. It would be an absolute staggering amount of empty space if they were to remove that freeway. And I think it would be a great thing if they did, because right now you're cut off from the lake when you're in downtown Toronto. You got to go. It's very, very unattractive. And maybe that's one of the things that Trudeau is going to spend money on in his infrastructure spend. I don't know when he gets elected, assuming he does get elected.
Well, Vancouver's short version of a freeway, the viaducts, the city's going to tear that down to the tune of $200 million plus, and that's going to free up a lot of real estate as well.
Well, it's true. I mean, you look at the amount of space. I mean, you think about it. I've got a car. It takes up space at home, then I drive it to work. It takes up space at work. The roads that I travel on take up space. I mean, you just imagine. It's hard to imagine because we've grown up with cars, but the amount of space they take up in any major city like Edmonton or Calgary or Vancouver, there's an awful lot of space that could be freed up. Now, we still have to get around somehow, so there would have to be a big spend, but it might be worth it. I mean, we're talking about all kinds of different issues that would change, and everybody could ride their bikes or even maybe use
take transit?
Take transit? I mean, they might even have transit. Who knows? Even in Edmonton, we're building a transit out to Mill Woods, which is a fairly long way out, and I think it's several hundred million. No, it's actually into the billions of dollars. Sorry, check that. It's into the billions of dollars. And just before the election announcement, they got approval to go ahead. The thing that was holding back was the federal government money that was expected, but they approved it, and so now it's under construction. So that'll change things dramatically, and bringing a car downtown, even working downtown, does it really make sense? Maybe we don't all need to go downtown every day. I can work from my home almost equally as well as I can from my office downtown.
And of course now they're talking about fleets of thousands of driverless cars. In other words, it comes, it picks you up, it takes you to work, and then it goes off and does some other business. Yeah,
and you could be working on your smartphone the whole time while you're traveling, so you don't even have to waste any time at all. So it would be wonderful. I've often wondered about all that time we spend in our car in traffic and how wasteful it is, and I try to use it as best I can. I've got satellite radio, which is nice. You can listen to stuff, but I'm very careful not to text while I'm driving, but I can see why people do it, because it just seems like the time is completely wasted. So if somebody could figure out a way to make that productive time, what a great, imagine all those millions of people that it would be, their productivity would go up dramatically.
And you don't have to own the car, you just pay for the time you use it.
Exactly. So, I mean, maybe that's the future.
Well, in Vancouver, the co-op car services are already very popular, and they predict that new car sales in Vancouver, at least, are going to fall dramatically because people only rent that car for the moment that they use it, but otherwise they take transit, they ride, they walk. Downtown Vancouver is very compact. It's one of the most compact downtowns in the world, where you have over 100,000 people live where they work.
Yeah, and you don't need a car. I mean, I lived in Toronto for a couple of years, and I lived in an apartment. This is like 40 years ago, and I took the subway, they call it there, and you didn't need a car at all. And occasionally, when you wanted to go somewhere, you just rent a car for the weekend or something like that. But other than that, you didn't need to have a car sitting there. I suspect that that's a trend that's going to gain momentum. And also the other one is probably electric cars too. I suspect that'll be
Well, Volkswagen has just announced a $1.5 billion switch to making electric cars instead of diesels.
I think that diesel scandal is going to accelerate the conversion to electric cars, because the idea was diesel was, quite a bit less, lower producer of carbon emissions. But if that's not true, because they were cheating, then the impetus will be to accelerate the conversion to electric. And
I suspect a diesel vehicle with proper pollution controls would not be the peppy little thing that they promote.
No, that's right. That used to be the knock about diesel, didn't it? It didn't have the... whereas electric has got apparently ludicrous acceleration. Is that the word, ludicrous?
Yes, it is. Well, that's because an electric engine has the most torque. And so from 0 to 60 kilometers, electric is the most efficient. Once you go above 60 Ks, if you do a lot of highway driving, gasoline's the way to go. We're going to talk about a study that was done on what kind of results happened to the stock market after the election of a certain party. And we'll discuss that with Hilliard MacBeth right after the break. Coming up after the break, we'll discuss what happens to the Canadian stock market and economy after the election of a certain political party. More with Hilliard MacBeth right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet. For intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600. 604-699-8600.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Hilliard MacBeth. Hilliard, you were saying there was an interesting study done about what happens to the Canadian economy depending on the election result, and you said this study had some surprising, or at least for some people, surprising results.
Well, what people generally assume, and I guess I would have thought this too, is that conservatives have this reputation of being favorable towards business and the stock market. But the last three elections, 06, 08, and 2011, which were minority, and majority for the conservatives, 1 month later, the TSX stock market index was down 9%, down 3%, and flat on the three ones. The worst one was down 9%. Now, it was right in the middle of the global financial crisis, and Lehman Brothers had just defaulted a month before. So maybe they can't blame that on the conservative minority election, but that was the result. The best single result that I can find in this list here was actually not an election. It was a referendum on Quebec, and in 1980, when they said no, they didn't want to separate, the market was up 7% a month later. But of the actual elections, the Liberal majority in 1997 was plus 2.2%. The Mulroney majority in 1988 was plus 2.7%. So it's a mixed bag, but it just isn't what you'd expect just off the top, that Liberals were necessarily bad for the stock market and Conservatives were good. In fact, you can find examples of bad and good from both parties. Now, there's never been, since Confederation, there's never been an NDP national majority or minority government. So that would actually be a different result. We wouldn't know what to expect there, but it doesn't seem that that's likely at this point.
And the Liberals, like to point out, they are the oldest political party in Canada.
Yes, they go all the way back, and now the Canadian dollar is also interesting. The Canadian dollar under the last three Conservatives, and maybe this is why the Conservatives are struggling and probably won't hang on Monday, because people really care about the dollar, I've discovered in the last couple of years. The last three elections, the Conservative minorities and then the majority in 2011, a month later the dollar was down, ranging between 0.3% and 6%, and all three times it was down. So it's hard to imagine the Canadian dollar rallying whatever happens on Monday, because the Canadian dollar looks weak. But people, especially people that travel, or if they own they're snowbirds and they own properties in the U.S., they're quite stressed out about the weakness in the Canadian dollar, and they probably would love to see whatever party they could put in that would get the dollar to go back up. But unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be in the cards this time.
Yes, and we buy our gasoline in American dollars because people ask me, how come the price at the pump hasn't really followed the price drop in crude oil? And I said, well, what has the Canadian dollar done in the last 3 years? We've lost 25-30% of its value.
I even learned something recently that I hadn't even thought about, which was the price of lumber. Even though Canada produces most of the lumber that's sold in North America, by far, probably 80-90%, the price is set in U.S. dollars in the U.S. So every morning in Canada, if the Canadian dollar drops, that hardware store is jacking up the price of lumber. And I've been told by home renovation experts that, I don't know, I'm complaining. I'll say, why does it cost so much? And that's one of the explanations. Is every time the Canadian dollar drops, they have to the lumber store raises its price in Canadian dollars, even though we produce the lumber here in Canada. It's crazy.
I know a lot of Canadians, at one point, if you said, would you like to have our currency done in U.S. dollars, they said, well, no, it's worth $1.10. Why would I want that? Could there be a new argument for Canada to take on the U.S. currency?
Well, so the national argument, which has been used by several people, is that we're going to have a recovery because our Canadian dollar has dropped down to 76 cents. And even though the oil sands and the oil and gas is really weak, we're going to be helped out by the manufacturing exporters, primarily in Ontario and BC and Quebec, because of the lower Canadian dollar. So we're really dependent on the strength in exports in the non-energy, non-materials related sectors in Canada. So we actually probably need the dollar. This is the bad news for those snowbirds and other people. We probably need the dollar to go even lower, and that is we're talking even maybe below 70 cents in order to get our economy back on track. Because if you think about it, if you're a car manufacturer and you're thinking about Mexico versus Canada for a new plant, you'd want to see a lower Canadian dollar, and you'd want to also have some kind of reassurance that it wasn't just a temporary. If the dollar goes back to $1.10, the Canadian dollar goes up above par again, then your plant is going to be worthless. So you not only would want to see a lower Canadian dollar, you'd want to have some guarantee that it was going to stay lower.
And Vancouver, of course, depends on the film business, and the lower Canadian dollar brings more producers from Los Angeles.
Yeah, no, that's a different deal in the sense that if the Canadian dollar was lower, the movie only takes 3 months or less to shoot that film, so they can pretty well be guaranteed that for the duration of the shoot they can count on a lower Canadian dollar. So there's a lot of benefits like that, but unfortunately those, you've seen it in Vancouver, and we've seen it in Alberta too, where those movie people, they come and go, and when the dollar goes up high, they're all gone, and then when the dollar goes down, they all come back. So, and there's also tax incentives involved in that too. I think at least there has been in the past. Well,
I know in Nova Scotia they took away the tax credit for film production there. They don't have any productions now to tax.
There's nothing left. No, it's amazing, and same thing happened in Alberta. We do have one show in Alberta. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Anyway, there's one show that's shooting here. I think it might be a Netflix production, but it'll come back if the dollar stays down or goes a little bit lower. It'll come back, so that's a very positive. And then, of course, the other thing that's positive is people stay home rather than traveling, maybe in the winter, Edmonton and Calgary won't be totally empty for 3 months, January, February, March, like the last few years. They've been pretty well emptied out for.
Come to Vancouver and Victoria. It's summertime here compared to Alberta in February.
Yeah, we don't have to go and spend those expensive U.S. dollars. We can just go to Victoria and enjoy the winter.
Count the flowers.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, right now, in fact, where I live, all the spring flowers are coming up because we had a drought for 4 months. So I have dandelions, clover, bluebells, buttercups. Flowers that you normally see in the spring are coming up now.
Wow, that is amazing. Well, it's really unseasonably warm in Edmonton as well, and Calgary. I mean, we're still golfing, which is almost unheard of at this point.
But you do know if you have a long, extended fall on the prairies, that means when winter arrives, it's going to be a blizzard. It could be.
I sure hope there's snow this year, because last year the skiing was not that great.
Not here either.
Not in Whistler. Well, I was thinking of Whistler, and it was pretty bad, and even the interior of BC wasn't much better. So hopefully this year we get a really good snow year, because we can't afford to go anywhere else, so we got to stay home.
Well, lots of snow is good for the farmers too.
Yeah, that's right. If
you don't have oil, at least you still have wheat. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Nice to be on your show, and I've got my fingers crossed for Monday.
And I won't ask for what, but just for better, right?
I'd like to see a majority government. That's, I guess I can give my bias away and say I'm looking for change, and I'm looking for a majority, because the last thing we need is another minority. And I don't know how. I mean, I don't think strategic voting really happens all as much as people talk about it. They talk about it way more than it actually happens. But it would be nice to see a clear majority, because the minority, they're just going to get messy for a while, and then we'll probably have another election right away.
And that costs us a lot of money.
And it costs money, but not only that, a lot of these things, like we just talked about, the infrastructure investments and things like that, it would be good if we got going on that right away. And plus, figuring out this immigration file, where business people tell me that they're having horrible times with keeping staff that have to be sent back because their visas expired and stuff like that. There's a whole bunch of things like that are hurting the Canadian economy that any kind of a majority is going to be an improvement, I think.
Plus, you take a look at the Canadian economy. Anytime we've had an immigration wave, yes, it costs you some money to integrate those people. But then after they've arrived, have they not helped push the Canadian economy higher?
I think they're all hungry to work, and they're willing to work longer hours than the Canadians, or maybe some of us are a little bit complacent now. And it's a boost to the economy. There's no question that the best performing, and this is why I'm sure this is why Germany is agreeing to take so many immigrants. People think they're doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. I suspect they are fully aware of the fact that their population is rapidly aging. Their population is like Japan almost, and they need an influx of younger people. And what better place to get a bunch of younger people from than these people who are desperate to work?
Well, the last demographic study in Canada shows there's more baby boomers now than children. We're in the same state.
Yeah, and who's going to hammer all those nails? The baby boomers aren't going to do it. They can't do it anymore, right? So there's no way.
Hilliard, once again, thank you very much for being here.
Talk to you soon.
My guest has been Hilliard MacBeth, CEO of the MacBeth Group in Edmonton and author of the book, When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. You can forward comments about the show to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.